Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Brent Moore's here. Time for market and sector analysis. I'm sitting in for Mr. Mike Fairborn, who's out this week. I think he'll be back next week. But my opportunity to talk with you, and today I want to talk to you about scanning for strength in the market, scanning for those areas of the market that are stronger, those individual stocks that are smart, that are not smart, that are stronger right now. Speaking of smart, I've got Cameron May helping me out in the chat. So I appreciate Cam. Cam's had a busy day. He was doing chat for me earlier. Then I know he taught a class webcast here just right before this one, and now it's back to the chat. So we're keeping Cam out of trouble here today. So, but you can follow Cam or myself on X at Brent Moore CS, at Cameron May CS. He posted those handles in the chat there. So for your convenience, and if you're not watching live, glad to have you here as well, watching on the recording. Let's go through a few disclosures and then we'll get to the main subject at hand. But the information today is provided for general informational purposes only. It's not an individual recommendation or personalized investment advice. Schwab does not recommend the use of technical analysis as a sole means of investment research, the paper money software application. That's for educational purposes only. And all investing involves risk, including risk of loss you're going to lose the whole thing when you're buying stock in particular. Could go to zero. And let's see, past performance is no guarantee of future success, future results. And that's true. That's certainly pertinent to this session because we're going to be talking about finding stocks that have been doing well. Of course, that's no guarantee that they're going to continue to do well there. So there we go. Let's head on over to the Thinkorswim platform, and let's look at the market, and let's look at, so this is kind of what I want to do. I want to look at the market. I want to look at sectors and see what sectors are stronger over different time periods. And then I want to talk about searching for areas of strength. Okay, fair enough. We'll do that. Then we'll do maybe an example trade or two. So here's the market. This is the S&P 500. We've actually closed kind of near the low of the day, but we're up 1.7%. Nothing to sneeze at there. That's not terrible. We were up a little higher earlier in the day, but that's a nice bounce. And this is a higher low, folks. So that's a good thing. If you're a bull, I guess. But keep in mind, higher lows can occur in the midst of a downtrend. Okay, and that's what we've seen. We've seen this downtrend. In fact, where we're at right now, and we're not quite at market close, we still have another hour to go. We're right at that 20-day moving average. I've kind of covered it up. It's a little hard to see. That's the red line right there. Okay, so that's the 20-day moving average. And so if you're a bull, in addition to the higher low, which we've seen, we'd like to see start breaking through moving averages, breaking through trend lines, breaking through recent highs. Right there, that would probably give a lot of bulls more confidence in the market. There we go. So we'll see what happens. But even in the midst of this market, it's not all created equally. There are some areas of strength in the market and some areas of significant weakness. So let's do this. Let's take a look at what some of those areas would potentially be. And I want to look in particular at sectors. So here's a list of sectors. And this list, by the way, is one you can certainly get. It's a public watch list. Go to the public S&P 500 sector indices. Okay, that's the list. If you do have that list, you'll want to add a description column. Because if you're just looking at the symbol, this is what you're going to see, and you're going to go, I don't know what is what. Neither do I. I've been looking at this list for years now, I think, and I don't recall what symbols are what, so that's why I have this on there. And you can see what it's doing. And of course, you can scroll through these and see how they're doing, but one way you can do this is you can always add in columns. So if you have this list, and you click on the little gear and you click on customize, you can do a percentage change. That percentage change is today's change. Well, that's well and good. We can see what things are going on today, but you can also look at different time frames. Look at percentage change since. Okay. This is not a custom script. This is just a normal item on there, percentage change since. Since when, you say? Well, you get to adjust it. You get to change that. So add it, and then you can just kind of scroll over and you'll see it gives you the choice. I think the default is 5 days. Okay. Default is 5 days, and I changed it to a month. So I'm looking at the last month. But if you want to look at a different time frame, you can certainly do that. So I'm going to add that on here. And so now this is the percentage. This is today's change. And this right here is the 1 month change. And if I click on this, I can sort it from good to not so good, or from bad to less bad. Actually, Staples have done relatively well over the past month. Over the past month, here's Staples. They've done fairly well, up 3.5% over the last over the last month. Utilities, hanging in there, roughly break even, just shy of that over the past month. Hey, for most people in your portfolios right now, I think a lot of you would say, I would take break even over the past month because of what the market's been doing. But then it just kind of gets worse from there. Real estate, financials, this is going to be discretionary, and so on down the list. Worst performing sector over the last month, energy. Okay, that's got hit pretty hard. Healthcare, information technology, not too good. So if you want to do a true top-down analysis, you could say, well, I'm just going to go and just look in this area, in these areas for stocks to potentially consider. Okay, and we'll do examples today, but these examples aren't recommendations. But you don't have to do the true top-down analysis. You could even, there may be some stocks that are bucking the trend in their sectors. You can do that. So either way, you can do that. And one way to do this is to use the scan function. So that's what I want to cover today, is using the scan function to try and find stocks that are performing well. And there's a lot of different measures you can use on this. I'm just going to close down this left-hand column here for a sec, just so we can see it a little better. I'm going to click on that scan function. And here it is. In particular, when I say scan, I mean I'm talking about the Stock Hacker today. Okay. And there are different scans that you can create. What you do is you can click on Add Filter, and it's going to add in filters. Let me just start with stock here. Okay. And if I pull up stock, it just defaults to the ask price, but I can change that, and I can say something like, well, what's today's, here's the net change, okay? So let's say I want net change at least, I'm just going to put a minimum of 1 in there, minimum of 1, run that scan. Well, there's a lot of stocks there. I don't want to look at all stocks. So we're going to use, instead of all stocks, I'm going to go down to the S&P 500 here. Okay, I'm just going to select S&P 500. That is an important point on these scans, by the way. If you're using these scans, use these upper areas to further refine your scan. Okay, so here I'm just limited to the S&P 500. Now I can see all the stocks that have gone up at least $1 today in terms of share price in the S&P 100. If I sort this to net change, the lowest one that meets the parameters is up about $1.02. The ones that are less than $1 aren't even showing on the scan because I'm getting, yeah, there we go. Because, hold on one sec, let me do that again. For some reason that didn't do the S&P 500 the first time. Everything that isn't up at least $1 isn't going to be on that list. Okay. If I want to do, instead of net change, if I want to do it in terms of percentage, you can do percentage change. It's going to do the same thing, essentially. I want everything that's up at least, say, 2% today on the S&P 500. And you can see percentage change-wise, that's added on there, okay? I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't want to dwell on that, so I'm going to move forward, but let me just see if there's any questions I need to do. Chris says, anyone else having columns vanish from the watch list gadget? I haven't seen that lately, Chris. That may be a good reminder, though. If you do have an issue, Sometimes you come back and it will reset itself. But once you set up your Thinkorswim, save your workspace in case you get something kind of screwy that comes up, that you can reset to a setup that you want. Okay, just a reminder, because that stuff happens. Okay, so those are a couple basic ways to look for that, but we can go a lot further than that in terms of trying to find strength here. But to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to these filters, and instead of adding stock filters, I'm going to get rid of that stock filter there. I'm going to add a study filter. And just a heads up, study filters aren't going to be available on Paper Money. You're going to have to use your live platform for study filters. So I'm going to click on study filters, and it's going to default to this ADX crossover. It's just first on the alphabetical list. And there you go, okay? But there's more, say, robust ways of looking for market strength in this area. I want to go through a few of those, and then I want to build a scan here with you. But let me just mention, if I click on this, I can go and I can change this to whatever I want. So for example, I can do price change. If I click on price change, again, this is not going to be available in the in Paper Money. Okay. And this scan right here is S&P 500, and we're looking for price change. So the closing price is at least, and we can tweak these. Okay, we can tweak these. We're going to do these categories there. Okay. Now, I feel it's such a good comment in the chat. I just want to mention it to everybody. George said, you know, his tip, build a liquidity scan. And actually, I have that. I have done that, George. But it is a good tip for everybody. George said, build a liquidity scan, save it, then you can intersect this liquid scan with everything else. In this case, I did S&P 500. Okay. But once you save your scan, this is just a little bit of a tangent here. Once you save your scan, you can then go intersect with whatever you saved it as. So in my case, I have one that's liquid options, but you know, you can name it whatever you want, and then it's going to narrow it down even further. That when you save a scan, it's then available in your personal watch list as one of these parameters up here. But I want to stay pretty basic with what everybody has right now. Everybody has that S&P 500 because that is a public scan there. So, but if I want to find a stock that has been going up, I can say, look, I want something that's gone up at least, we'll say, I don't know, 5% over the last 10 bars. And I can click on scan. And we've got, well, a lot of stocks, because we you know, the market went down and we've had a kind of a rebound. Let's push it a little bit. Let's go 10% over the last 10 bars. That should narrow it down. We're still getting quite a few on there. We're still getting quite a few. So a lot of stocks have rebounded pretty significantly here. But that's a way of trying to find stocks that are stronger or weaker, right? You could say 10% less than they were 10 bars ago. Let's see what we got. If you're looking for bearish, it's thinking, okay, we only had two. Couple came up. Rough times for these stocks. Now, bearish, why would you ever look for bearish? You know, there's bearish option trades out there that a lot of people will do. They'll buy a put or something. I'm not going to get into options. That's the last time I'm going to talk about options today. Make sure you research options before you trade any of those, and we have classes on those. But that may be one reason why you'd look for a bearish trade there. So that's one. I bring that up. I'm not going to bring up every way today. And the reason is there's just too many. I mean, I could talk about this for 3 hours probably. But I want to talk to you about some that I have found helpful in my scans. Okay? So price change is one that I have definitely used in the past. So I want you to be aware of that. Now there's another one out there, and these are kind of all pre-built studies here, is you can go to price direction. They kind of sound the same, and I often have to kind of look at them to remind myself which is which. Price direction, you just got to read it. The closing has increased over the last 3 bars. Well, I can change that. I can say if I want it to have gone down over the last 3 bars, I can say decreased instead of increased. If I want to say 5 bars, have any stocks in the S&P 500 gone up for 5 consecutive days in a row? Let's see. Couple have. Align and Dollar Tree have 5 days in a row. Okay. Now that kind of begs the questions. I say days. It technically says bars here. And on these, this isn't true for just this scan, but other scans. When you look at this is days. And therefore, when I'm talking about bars, I'm talking about days. If I change this to an M for minutes, it would be 5 bars, 5 minutes in a row, or 5 if this were a W, it'd be 5 weeks in a row. So you need to match your scan with whatever charts you're kind of looking at. In other words, if I look at charts, I have a 6-month daily chart up here, but if I want to go to a 3-year weekly chart and I want to find something where the bars have gone up 5 weeks in a row, what I would do is I'd go here. I don't know if we're going to have any. I suspect probably not, but who knows? Maybe. I'm going to scan. We got one. Kroger. Kroger's gone up 5 weeks in a row on this. And so we should see that. Hoping. Otherwise, I don't understand why not. Yeah, there we go. That's pretty good performance there. Okay. So that's another scan that I have used in the past that I have found helpful. Now, let me give you a couple more here that are kind of these preset, and then I want to talk about some customized scans. I want to talk to you about customizing scans. But here's one, near highs and lows. So if I want to find a stock which is near its 252 days, why do they come up 252 periods? Where'd that come from? Okay. That came from, there's about approximately 252 trading days in a year. Trading days in a year. Yes, I know there are 365 days in a year. There's 252 trading days, approximately at least in a year. So if I want to find something that's within 3% of the yearly high on the S&P 500, I do that. Philip Morris, Berkshire Hathaway, Netflix, Kellanova, and so on. So that's one that's, maybe, so the notion that the market's crashed and everything's bad, well, no, some of these stocks are doing really well. And these are some bigger name McDonald's. Okay. And I'm back to day. If I change this to week, this would be 252 weeks. That'd be a lot of weeks. Okay. So I'm going to leave it where we have it right there. Okay. Let's see. So that's another one. Let me show you, and let's just kind of go through a couple. I'm probably not going to do them here. Gap up. You want to find stocks that have gapped up today? Stocks that have gapped up. Well, there you go. The current bar is at least 2% above the previous day's bar. Or gap down if you want to do bearish. All these you can do bearish, bullish for bearish. Okay. So there we go. Now, the next one I want to use, it's one I'm actually going to do an example with, I think. Okay. Yeah, I may have misspoken. This is a response in the chat. I may have said scans can only be done in the real money, not the paper money. I did not mean that. I meant some of these studies, the studies only in the live platform, not the paper money there. So, okay. So, but one that I love, it doesn't mean there's no promise of stock performance or anything. I'm just saying I like the scan. is going up and using what is a moving average. Where's a stock in relationship to a moving average? Okay, because when I'm looking at a chart, that's often a kind of a key criteria. Let me go here. Here's Kroger. Obviously, Kroger's been doing well. I think it was on our scan, which is why that came up. You can see it's above its 20-day and its 50-day moving average, which I have on my chart here. Now, as I'm looking at different stocks, and I scroll through these, you're going to find most of those stocks are not above their 20-day and their 50-day moving average. If I just kind of randomly go through these, I'll just kind of randomly, you can see, oh, that one peaked up above, but most of them not doing so hot here on that. Actually, some are improving a little bit, but very often for trend, we'll look at a relationship between a stock and a moving average. Okay? So I want to do that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a scan with us today. And I'm going to start with the S&P 500 stocks. There's been some discussions about how to get more liquidity. One way, a couple suggestions that people say, I think mentioned in the chat, were, and I'd like to give credit to who said these, weeklies. Wiley said weeklies. And I know someone else said penny increment options. Maybe that was George. Yeah, George said penny increment options. In other words, S&P 500, I could say, well, that's not liquid enough. Well, let me go to weeklies. Now when I scan, I'm going to let me get rid of this. So we have no filter results. I've narrowed that S&P 500 down in half by adding in weeklies. Those are going to tend to be the more liquid of those S&P 500 stocks. If I go to penny increment, I got to get on the right list there. Penny increment, see how many of that narrows it down to. That narrows it down to 152 stocks of the more liquid stocks. You can also add in volume parameters, whatever. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to go to study. We're going to do a lot of study today here. And we're going to go to a moving average scan. Okay. So there's one called moving average scan. There it is, moving average scan. And I want stocks that are above I'm going to say their 50-day moving average. Now, there can be a day, I don't necessarily need it to be 10% above the moving average. In fact, that may be a little bit more of a concern if it's so far extended that it's 10% above its 50-day moving average. I'm just going to say 1% above. So it's fine if it's just a little bit above, and we can run that scan, and I came up, we started with 500 stocks. We're now down to 21 stocks. Okay, that came up, including some bigger names on there. All right, so there's that. But let's not stop there, because one challenge that people are having right now in the market is this. A challenge that people are having is that when they look at the earnings calendar is chock full of stocks. So if you're trying to avoid earnings, can we do that with the scan? The answer is yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to add another filter. Here's another filter. I'm going to go to study. I'm going to go to corporate actions. I'm going to go to earnings, and I'm going to say the default is earning. It has earnings in the next, 10 bars or whatever. Well, I don't want that. I want to avoid earnings. So I'm going to say it does not have earnings anytime in the next. And I'm going to say the next month. Okay, so I'll do 21 bars, which is kind of an average there. And I'm going to come, here's 7 stocks that are in the S&P 500, penny increment options, and are at least 1% above the 50-day moving average, and they don't have earnings in the next month. Okay? So let's look at a few. CrowdStrike, Dollar Tree. Let's just take a look. CRWD. Okay. Not necessarily a great trend on this, I would say, but it has gone up. we're above that 50-day. This purple, not purple, kind of teal line is my 50-day, but not really a trend here. So maybe we want to add in a trend indicator. Well, we can do that. Well, let's just look at a couple others before we do that there. Netflix, WBA. Let's just do that real quick. NFLX, here's Netflix. Again, maybe, I mean, fairly strong. This is at least above, this is over the 50-day moving average. And WBA, this is probably one a lot of traders may consider not trading right now because they're actually going private. So they're being bought out and are going to be not public. And I don't know the exact price, but I imagine it's right at about $11 a share probably, which is why that. So we'll skip that one there. But here's the point. That's an easy way to find stocks that don't have earnings in the next month, basically, and are above their 50-day moving average. Now, if I want to add in something else, what I can do is maybe I want to add in a trend here. Well, there's different trend indicators and there's different ways to do it. But one way is to kind of layer in the price change. Remember the price change one was, let me just add another parameter here. The price change one, when we did this, was to go to and say it's at least 2% above where it was 10 days ago. You could add that and do it again and say, well, it's got to be at least 4% above where it was 20 bars ago. And you can add another one and say it's got to be at least 10% above where it was 30 bars ago or something like that. And by doing that, you can come up with a trend, more or less. There's, you got to see on the results. So sometimes adding this in multiple times and just kind of changing the look back period. Because the problem is when you pick one look back period, what happens is you look at a stock and it's done this and then it just jumps up and then it's done this or whatever. And it says, well, that's great, but that's not really an upward trend. So here we go. Wiley said, can you add in a custom script? I'm going to in just a minute. But hold on one second here, Wiley. But let me just mention this. Another way to do it is there are trend indicators out there. So for example, the ADX, which I don't know that I have just a plain ADX here, but we will add that in. We have ADX crossover, is a trend indicator. And so if I go, I don't think there is, if I remember correctly. There's not. So I'm going to add custom, okay? And a window just popped up. And I'm going to, hold on one sec. Let me get out of this. What did I do? I'm going to go down to custom. Is this not? Something's not right here on this. Let me get rid of this and study. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. Okay, so here's what I want. Okay, so I don't want the ASADX crossover. I'm going to look for an ADX, but it doesn't matter what I'm looking for. Maybe I want an RSI. We'll look at that in a minute too. But what I can do is I can just edit this, or I can delete this, either way. I'm just going to edit this and say, I don't want ADX crossover. I just want a study. If I'm looking at an indicator, that's a study. So I'm going to click on a study, and I'm just going to click on ADX. And I want an ADX greater than, and then a certain value. So I'm going to just put in value. Okay, so this is a custom. The ADX is greater than a value. And what value is that? Well, you can use different values, but if I do like 30, that's usually considered to be a pretty strong trend. Okay, ADX greater than 30. Let's see what we got, if we get anything here on this. Yeah, we got 2. So the goal of this is to not have a stock that is doing that. In other words, it's gone up, but it just went up in a big spike. What I'd rather have is a trend. And this is a trend indicator, this ADX. And therefore, if I do that, hopefully we're seeing more of a trend. So we have DG and Kroger, okay? So here's Dollar General, DG. And there, you see that, I mean, that's what I think visually for a lot of technical traders, that's kind of what they have in mind when they're looking at the trend. Now, we're above that 50-day moving average. Well, yeah, definitely. But we could have done that by going flat and just kind of doing this. In this case, we have that kind of nice trend. And the other stock that came up was Kroger. Here's Kroger. Again, we have kind of that nicer trend that I think, a lot of technical traders may want on that. So that's a way of doing that. That's a way of customizing the study to do that. So I may come back to those stocks. I'm just going to write those down real quick so I don't forget them. Dollar General and Kroger. Okay, we may go back on those. So those are our trend stocks. But look, we can add more in terms of performance. If I want, what I can do is I can layer on even more. And you can also, you don't need it to be 30. 30 is kind of a fairly high level there. But even if I want to drop it down a little bit, we'll say, maybe we'll edit that and make it 25 and see if it makes a difference. 25, I suspect we may pick up more. Okay, scan. No, we don't pick up any more. Okay, so that's, it's the same. Let me go, I'm gonna just clear that filter here. And one reason, and there we've added a couple more, okay? So, let me grab my little drawing tool here. So I have ADX greater than 25, lower than 30. So ADX is just, look, the higher the ADX, the higher the ADX is, the more it's trending. Now, it could be a bearish trend, it can be a bullish trend, but we know we're getting bullish here because we have this moving average scan on there, where the close is above the 50-day moving average. We can't really be in a downtrend and have the close below a 50-day moving average, right? So this is a trend strength indicator. That's why we have on there. And Ted mentioned to me, don't forget, I kind of forgot that for a sec, which is why we're limiting our results so much. This is really very limiting right now because right now, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we have a ton of stocks releasing earnings, right? So that's going to exclude most of the stocks out there. Well, we've got a few here, okay? We've got a few on our list that have the trend that it's been trending up and they don't have earnings. There we go, okay. But maybe you want to add something like another indicator on there. Maybe, what if we do this? What if we go to charts and we say, I want to look at an RSI. Now, I'm using this as an example. I'm not going to do this with every stock, with every indicator, because it's just, there's too many. I want to show you and use RSI as an example for you, but you could do the same thing with other indicators here. So if you are let's see, a MACD fan, or a stochastic fan or something like that, then what I'm about to say on RSI is you could probably apply to those. But let's say I want an RSI that's going up. Notice on Kroger, it's not going up. RSI is actually going down. So you can kind of consider that a diminishment of momentum there. Okay? So what if we want that RSI to be going up? Well, we could do that. How do we do that? There's no RSI going up indicator. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on Add Filter. there's our filter, okay? And it just threw in this one, just like I said. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize this. We're going to make that custom. And I don't want that ADX crossover. I can either delete it and add in a new one, delete, add a condition, okay? And I can say, I want the RSI to be going up. Well, I can look here all day, but I'm not going to get an RSI going up indicator, okay? But there's RSI, but this RSI here is just simply the RSI value, okay? Or is typically how we're going to do this. But if I want the RSI, I don't care what the RSI value is. What I care about instead is the RSI is higher than it was before. And so the way I can do that is I can go to scan, I can go here, and I can modify this, and I can say, I want that RSI. So RSI is what? RSI is a study. So I'm going to type in RSI here, RSI. Okay, there's RSI. And I want it to be greater than, not a value. If I wanted it to be greater than 70 or 60 or something, I can click on this and select value and say, my RSI is greater than a certain value. But that's not what I want. I want it to be higher than it was. So what I'm going to say is, I want the RSI to be greater than study what the RSI was, and the was is the offset, a day ago. I want the RSI to be higher than it was a day ago. This offset means 1 day, okay? Because we're dealing with days here on this. If I wanted it to be higher than it was 3 days ago, I'd put 3 in there. These are positive numbers here, going back in time. You can't do negative numbers, okay? So now if I click on save, RSI is greater than it was, than the RSI was 1 day ago. If I click on save, click on OK, scan, we've got 2, okay? We've narrowed it down. So now if I look at these, ELV, okay, ELV, what we should see is the RSI going up. Okay? General trend up, had a kind of a big drop, but it's actually bouncing now with that RSI up. Let's look at the other one. What do we have? WRB. Okay? Here's WRB, WRB. Okay, so nice little trend up, and RSI is going up, and we're past earnings, so we don't have to deal with earnings. And let's maybe do a sample trade on that. But before that, let me just kind of summarize. This is our scan. Okay, this is our scan. We're looking at the S&P 500. The stock is at least 1% above its 50-day moving average. It doesn't have earnings. The trend indicator is greater than 25, and the RSI is greater than it's been. So in other words, it's going up. Okay. So here's my point. My point is not that this is the greatest scan that you need to use. My point is I wanted to familiarize you with this functionality up here at the top of the page. I wanted to familiarize yourself with adding scans, adding filters in, adding study filters, some common study filters that tell you about strength, a common filter that we use for earnings, and how to customize a filter there, okay? How to customize a filter. So we've done all that. Let's do this though. Let's go back to our chart. That looks reasonable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to put in a sample trade. I'm going to put in a stop level below my recent bounce low, 66.25. So I'm going to go about, we'll go a couple percent below that to about 65. I'm going to put in a stop around 65 on this. I'm going to right click on this chart. I'm going to buy custom with stop, and I'll do 100 shares, which is the default here on this. And I've got a stop. I'm going to make that good till canceled. And I'm going to put that stop in at 65. Of course, this is just a sample. This is not an recommendation. I'm going to confirm and send. Make sure you read everything there on that. And we're going to put that in, and that will be in our stock position. Why? What's the justification from a technical standpoint? The justification is it's been trending up. It's given us a bounce, and we don't have any earnings we're having to deal with right now. There you go. RSI's going up. I think that's it, folks. I think I've covered what I want to cover in terms of those scans. Let me just double check with questions here, and then we will wrap it up. Oh, one other thing I would say is this. One common intersection thing you can do if you want is you can go and you can say, well, I only want to be in a particular industry group by sector. So, at the beginning, we kind of did that sector strength thing. What sectors are stronger? Well, if you just want to target those stronger sectors, you can go add by industry here. And energy's been the worst sector, but you can click on select all energy or industrials, select all industrials, or you can go to staples or whatever and do it that way. So that's a common one I didn't do in this case, but when we intersect, it's not just with these watch lists, you can intersect it with your sector there. Okay? So, all right, folks. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Thanks, Cam, for helping me out in the chat. And let's see, coming up next, we have trading growth and value stocks. So check that out. And make sure you follow Cam and I on Twitter or X at BrentMooreCS, at Cameron May CS. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye, everybody.